What if every human being could see their own lifespan as a glowing countdown above their heads, ticking away in real time? The first time it happened, the world froze. One moment, people were going about their lives, sipping coffee, arguing over bills, laughing at jokes, and the next, they were staring at the numbers floating above their own heads and everyone else's. The numbers were faintly luminous, like the glow of a firefly, and impossible to ignore. They hovered just above the crown of the skull, counting down in years, months, days, hours, minutes, and seconds. At first, chaos erupted. People screamed, cried, or simply stood in stunned silence. A man in a suit dropped his briefcase on the sidewalk, his countdown reading 2 years, 4 months, 6 days. A child playing hopscotch looked up at her mother, whose numbers glowed 47 years, 8 months, 2 days. The child's own countdown was a mystery to her, too high to read without a mirror. In the days that followed, the world tried to adapt. Scientists scrambled to explain the phenomenon, but no theory held. The numbers were intangible, unchangeable, and universally visible. They couldn't be photographed or measured, only seen. Philosophers debated whether this was a gift or a curse. Religious leaders called it divine intervention. Psychologists warned of the mental toll. For 28-year-old Clara, the numbers were a haunting reminder of her own mortality. Her countdown read 51 years, 3 months, 14 days. She tried to ignore it, but the glow was always there, a constant companion in her peripheral vision. She found herself staring at strangers' numbers on the subway, calculating their lives in her head. The elderly man with 6 months, 2 days sat quietly, reading a newspaper. The young woman with 72 years, 8 months tapped her foot impatiently, unaware of her fortune. Clara's best friend, Marcus, had a countdown of 3 years, 7 months, 9 days. He laughed it off at first, cracking jokes about living fast and dying young. But as the days passed, his bravado faded. One night, over drinks, he turned to her, his face pale under the dim bar lights. "What if I can't do it?" he asked, his voice trembling. "What if I can't fit everything I want into 3 years?" Clara didn't have an answer. She reached for his hand, but he pulled away, his eyes fixed on the numbers above her head. "You've got so much time," he said, his voice bitter. "You don't get it." The world began to fracture along the lines of time. Employers hesitated to hire people with short countdowns. Marriages crumbled when one partner realized the other had decades less to live. Parents agonized over their children's numbers, some too afraid to look. Clara's mother, a pragmatic woman with a countdown of 18 years, 2 months, called her one evening. "You need to start thinking about your future," she said. "You've got time, but it's not infinite." "I know," Clara replied, though the words felt hollow. She hung up and stared at her reflection in the window, the numbers above her head glowing faintly. One day, Clara met a man named Elias at a bookstore. He was tall, with kind eyes and a countdown of 12 years, 6 months, 3 days. They struck up a conversation about a novel they both loved, and soon they were laughing like old friends. For the first time since the numbers appeared, Clara felt a flicker of hope. But as their relationship deepened, the numbers loomed larger. Elias's countdown was shorter than hers, and the disparity gnawed at her. She found herself imagining a future without him, the years stretching out emptily after his numbers hit 0. "Do you ever think about it?" she asked him one night as they lay in bed, the glow of their countdowns casting faint shadows on the ceiling. "All the time," he admitted, "but I try not to let it define me. The numbers don't tell the whole story." Clara wanted to believe him, but the numbers were always there, a silent reminder of the inevitable. Then, one morning, something extraordinary happened. Clara woke up to find her countdown had changed. Instead of 51 years, 3 months, 14 days, it now read 47 years, 8 months, 2 days. She stared at it in disbelief, her heart pounding. She checked the mirror, but the numbers were the same. She rushed to Elias's apartment, her mind racing. "Look," she said, pointing to her countdown. "It's different." Elias frowned. "That's impossible. The numbers don't change." "But they did," Clara insisted. "I don't know how, but they did." Over the next few weeks, Clara's countdown continued to shift, sometimes gaining time, sometimes losing it. She became obsessed with tracking the changes, searching for patterns. She quit her job, stopped seeing friends, and spent hours poring over data, trying to understand what was happening. Elias tried to pull her back. "You're wasting the time you have," he said gently. "The numbers don't matter. What matters is how you live." But Clara couldn't let it go. She became convinced that if she could just figure out the rules, she could control the numbers. She could give Elias more time. She could save Marcus. She could fix everything. One night, as she sat alone in her apartment, surrounded by charts and notes, she realized the truth. The numbers weren't just counting down to death. They were counting down to change. Every choice she made, every action she took, altered the course of her life. The numbers weren't fixed. They were fluid, reflecting the endless possibilities of existence. She ran to Elias's apartment, her heart pounding. "I understand now," she said, breathless. "The numbers aren't a countdown to death. They're a countdown to transformation. We're not bound by them. We shape them." Elias smiled, his countdown glowing softly above his head. "I've been trying to tell you that," he said, "but you had to see it for yourself." Clara looked at him, her eyes filling with tears. "I don't want to waste another second," she said, and for the first time in months, she stopped counting.